Kevin Costner not being one of them, Kevin being a good guy. There were other people involved with that were not good guys to me. Once I said, hey, how about if we do this and that, maybe we could do some things together.
For decades, the entertainment industry operated under a singular assumption about Val Kilmer. He was brilliant but difficult, talented but temperamental, capable of extraordinary performances, but at the cost of friction on set. This narrative became so ingrained in Hollywood lore that it hardened into something approaching fact. Producers whispered about his demands, directors spoke of his intensity, and the story that Val Kilmer was a demanding perfectionist willing to make life complicated for everyone around him became the default version of who he was as a professional and as a person. But in the twilight of his career, after Val Kilmer's passing in April 2025, Kurt Russell, one of the few people who had actually worked alongside him during one of the most crucial moments in both their professional lives, decided it was time to set the record straight. The timing of Russell's revelation matters enormously. When he sat down for an extensive interview in early 2024, more than a year before Kilmer's death, Russell wasn't responding to a tragedy or participating in the kind of obligatory tributes that emerge after someone passes away. He was simply choosing to tell the truth about his experience, about what it was really like to work with Val Kilmer, and about the man he had come to know and respect over the course of their collaboration. What Russell said contradicted the prevailing narrative so thoroughly that it forced a reckoning with everything people thought they knew about one of Hollywood's most misunderstood actors. The foundation for understanding their connection lies in understanding what was happening behind the scenes of Tombstone in 1993. That film arrived at a moment when everything that could go wrong seemed to be going wrong. Director Kevin Jarre, the man who had written the screenplay and was initially brought in to helm the production, found himself completely overwhelmed within a month of shooting. The scale of the undertaking exceeded what he was prepared to handle. With sets already constructed, the cast assembled, and cameras rolling, the production suddenly found itself without a director. The chaos was complete and immediate. Someone needed to step in with the expertise and the presence of mind to salvage what was rapidly becoming a disaster. Enter Kurt Russell. Though his actual role in saving the production would remain somewhat ambiguous for years. George Cosmatos, the director best known for Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was brought in as the official replacement. But Russell himself later revealed in interviews that the arrangement was far more complex than a simple director handover. Russell spent his nights meticulously planning shot lists, drawing up the visual strategy for each day's filming, and then handing those plans to Cosmatos to execute on set. Cosmatos arrived with barely 2 days of preparation time. The true creative architecture of the film was being constructed by Russell, while Cosmatos served as the on-set executor of those plans. For years, rumors swirled about who actually directed Tombstone, becoming one of Hollywood's most persistent pieces of behind-the-scenes mythology. What makes this situation even more complex is what was happening simultaneously on set. While Russell was essentially holding a collapsing production together through sheer force of will and creative intelligence, he was also working daily with Val Kilmer, an actor who carried a reputation that preceded him like a shadow. By the early 1990s, Val Kilmer had built a name for himself as an extraordinarily talented performer. No one disputed his abilities. But alongside that talent came stories. Stories about his intensity, his exacting demands, his unwillingness to settle for anything less than what he envisioned. Directors had complained about him. Co-stars had expressed frustration about working alongside him. Studios had taken note of his particular approach to filmmaking, which prioritized artistic integrity above all other considerations, including comfort, schedule, and budget. The reputation wasn't entirely unfair. Kilmer was, by any measure, a committed craftsman. He didn't simply memorize his lines and mark his positions. He fully inhabited his characters, sometimes at considerable cost to himself and to those working around him. His Juilliard training had instilled in him a method-driven approach to acting that produced extraordinary results on screen, but could also create complications on set. He was mercurial, opinionated, and utterly unafraid to voice his perspective on creative decisions. For a production that was already teetering on the edge of disaster, adding Val Kilmer to the mix seemed like an equation for absolute catastrophe. Yet the reality of what happened during the making of Tombstone diverged sharply from what everyone expected. Instead of conflict, instead of a clash between Russell's desperate attempts to maintain control and Kilmer's well-documented intensity, something entirely different emerged. The two men found themselves in remarkable sync. Russell, who was simultaneously managing the film's creative vision while performing one of the central roles, discovered in Kilmer a collaborator who understood exactly what he was trying to accomplish. They moved toward the same vision. They shared the same instincts about what the story needed. More importantly, they trusted each other. In early 2024, when Russell gave a wide-ranging interview looking back at his most iconic roles across 5 decades, he chose to address Tombstone and his work with Val Kilmer with striking candor. He didn't minimize the reputation Kilmer had carried, nor did he pretend that everyone in Hollywood hadn't heard stories about his difficulties as a co-star. What Russell did, instead, was provide the context that had been missing from that narrative all along. He described their relationship as marked by genuine trust. Not complicated trust, not the kind of trust that requires constant navigation and careful management, but a straightforward, uncomplicated foundation of mutual respect and creative alignment. Russell went further than simply characterizing their working relationship as functional. He described it as genuinely great. He explained that the two of them were always thinking along similar lines, always operating on the same creative wavelength. For a production as chaotic and pressured as Tombstone had been, that kind of alignment between the two principal actors amounted to everything. When Russell spoke about Kilmer's performance as Doc Holliday, he offered no qualifications, no diplomatic hedging, no careful language designed to be inoffensive. He called it brilliant. Not good, not strong, not effective. Brilliant. He said it was something that very few actors could come close to achieving. This wasn't throwaway praise offered casually in an interview. This was a deliberate, considered statement from someone who had spent months on set watching Kilmer work every single day, who understood the pressures the production was operating under, and who had the experience and perspective to calibrate exactly what he was saying. Kurt Russell has shared screen time with some of the finest actors of the last 50 years. He understands what extraordinary acting looks like at the highest level. When such a person looks back at a film made over 3 decades earlier and describes their co-star's work as something few actors could touch, that statement carries weight precisely because of who is making it. Equally important is what the timing of this revelation tells us. This interview was conducted and recorded in January 2024, more than a year before Val Kilmer's death. Russell wasn't speaking in the immediate aftermath of tragedy, wasn't crafting a eulogy, wasn't participating in the kind of carefully managed tribute that often emerges when someone passes away. He was simply speaking the truth as he had experienced it, with no particular agenda beyond being honest about what he knew and what he had witnessed. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of their connection emerged not in Russell's words, but in something they did at the conclusion of filming. After the intense months of production wrapped, Russell decided he wanted to give Kilmer a gift that would genuinely mean something. Something that reflected the work they had done together and the characters they had inhabited. In an act that was simultaneously hilarious and deeply symbolic, Russell arranged to obtain some of Kilmer's actual props from the film. The holster, the gun, the hat, the chair with Kilmer's name carved on the back. He had these photographed together into a proper keepsake, a memento of everything they had created together. But then Russell added what he called the final touch. He purchased for Kilmer a burial plot at Boot Hill Graveyard in Tombstone, Arizona. Yes, a genuine plot at the actual historic cemetery referenced throughout the film. Russell's logic was rooted entirely in character understanding. Doc Holliday, the role Kilmer had inhabited, was defined by death. It was a thing that shadowed him, that defined his fearlessness, that made him magnetic precisely because he was a dying man with nothing left to lose. What better gift, Russell reasoned, than a plot in the most legendary graveyard in the American West? The dark humor of this gift was perfectly calibrated. It was funny in the way that only people who truly understood the character could find it funny. But what happened next was something neither man had anticipated. Completely independently, with zero coordination or discussion. Val Kilmer had also prepared a gift for Kurt Russell. When Russell discovered what it was, the symmetry of it likely stopped him cold. Kilmer had purchased an acre of land overlooking Boot Hill Graveyard, a living man's view of the cemetery, the opposite perspective entirely. Think carefully about what had just occurred. Two actors, two intelligent, creative minds, who had spent months inhabiting characters defined by opposite philosophical relationships to death and life, had independently arrived at the exact same symbolic contrast without discussing it at all. Russell, who played Wyatt Earp, a man defined by survival and the pursuit of life, had given Kilmer a place in the ground. Kilmer, who had played a dying man obsessed with death, had given Russell land overlooking that same cemetery. They had created a perfect visual and philosophical complement to each other's gifts, without exchanging a single word about it. That's not coincidence. That's two people operating on such a similar creative frequency, understanding each other so deeply, that they could express their friendship in the exact same metaphor independently. Years before Russell's 2024 interview resurfaced following Kilmer's death, Val Kilmer had himself gone on record about their collaboration. In a 2017 blog post, he addressed the long-standing questions about who had actually directed Tombstone by simply stating the truth. Kurt Russell was solely responsible for the film's success. There was no question in his mind about it. Kilmer described watching Russell sacrifice his own performance and his own energy night after night, working on shot lists while everyone else slept, thinking about the film as a whole, the crew, the production, all while simultaneously trying to deliver one of the most iconic performances in American frontier cinema. Kilmer made clear that while Cosmatos received the official directing credit, it was Russell's creative investment, his relentless work, and his refusal to let the production collapse that transformed Tombstone into an enduring classic. What emerges from all of this is a portrait that contradicts almost everything that had been said about Val Kilmer in Hollywood for so many years. The narrative about him being a difficult actor, while not entirely without basis, had obscured something far more important. He was someone who could collaborate at the highest level, who could be trusted with the most crucial creative decisions, who could inspire admiration and respect in the people who actually worked alongside him. Kurt Russell's willingness to speak about this friendship, to correct the record, to remind people that the story they thought they knew about Val Kilmer was incomplete, this has become one of the most meaningful parts of Kilmer's legacy. When Val Kilmer passed away in April 2025 at the age of 65, that 2024 interview with Kurt Russell suddenly took on new significance. What had been a career retrospective became a tribute, became a record of what Russell had wanted to say while there was still time to say it. It stands now as an enduring testament to two artists who understood each other completely, who created something beautiful together, and who, across more than 30 years, never stopped respecting what the other had accomplished. That is the real truth about Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. Not a story of conflict or difficult personalities clashing, but a genuine human connection between two people who recognized greatness in each other and were grateful for the opportunity to create it together. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.